From Washington, this is the HPS Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners.
Good morning. It's Friday, April 17th. And man, guys, these weeks are just blowing by. This is a HPS Macrocast. And I feel like, it was just Easter yesterday and now it's Friday. We've got, a whole week of news to talk about. Markets are looking bullish this week. They're certainly looking bullish today. Not a whole lot has changed on the health front. We're, learned that overnight yesterday that, Gilead maybe has a therapeutic drug that may help things along. But we still have some, gridlock in Washington to talk about with, some of these programs and questions about the federal programs. The biggest is the $349 billion Paycheck Protection Program that the SBA Treasury has been running is now, it appears, officially out of money. We're here with John Fagan, Brendan Walsh, our partners on the Macrocast with Markets Policy Partners. I'm in Western Pennsylvania. You guys are in the DC area still. So look, they're out of money, and we still don't have a solution on getting them more money. Republicans want to add $251 billion to get it up to a nice even $600 billion. Democrats want that and want to add some money for hospitals and state and local and others. Guys, what do you think? Where do you think this is going? And are you concerned about the delay?
I'm hugely concerned about the delay because I just keep going back to when we had Adrian on, who's kind of an expert in this. And he was saying that, there's 30 million small businesses that need this. So I'm really impressed with what the Treasury and the SBA has done. In a week, they got out, or 2 weeks, $350 billion. But they only made a little over 1 million loans. So we're arguing over this $250 billion. We need 750. We're going to need $1 trillion to get it all out. And state and local governments do need it, but they don't need it today. Small businesses need it today. So we shouldn't be arguing about things that we need to do in the future. We're going to do them in the future. This money needs to get out the door immediately. So I am worried, but I hope that the public backlash is large enough that they come back on Monday and get it done.
Yeah, we know there's backlash. I can tell you there's, we've been on the phone the past couple of weeks talking with businesses of all sizes, but including groups of small businesses and walking them through the program and helping them understand, what they're eligible for and why and how to approach things with their banks. And I can tell you that there's, for those of us in Washington who are paying really, really close attention to it, we know that, there's money there. We know we could tell these people that they're eligible. I actually feel, I've said, look, don't worry, the money's going to be there. There's never been more bipartisan agreement on anything except for than this program. Yep. And that remains the truth. But I told him, look, I said, don't worry about the money running out. And, now at least for some days, you're going to have to worry about the money running out. And to your point, Brendan, is we don't want to halt in this program. We don't want to stall the response here. Speed is so important. All of these guys have people to pay. They have bills to pay. This is the kind of deterioration in the economy we're trying to prevent, and especially when people are most counting on it.
Yeah, a delay means that you could double the amount of businesses that aren't going to come back from this. That's what of a big deal we're talking about.
And Tony, do you think this bodes ill for the CARES 2.0 negotiation? I know we've spoken on this podcast before about how the partisan rancor is basically going to intensify over the next few iterations of these stimulus bills. We're already seeing it. Do you think this colors the CARES 2.0, which is most estimates are around $1 trillion or higher? And are sort of targeted for next month for the real horse trading to begin on that. Is this a really bad sign?
Well, we could call it. Maybe it's a bad sign, and maybe it's a good sign. Let's look at it both ways. The bad sign is the thing that we talked about and predicted, right? So like the further you get away from like the very depth of the crisis, the more partisan, rancor, partisan negotiating is going to take, move more to the center stage. So we talked about that and said that's coming, and so we shouldn't be surprised that we see it actually here. And so that's expected. It's not a great sign, but some of these other spending priorities are needs also, and so we're going to have sort of the normal fight on that. That's the bad news, is it's going to take longer and be more rancorous than we'd like it to be while we're still in a crisis. The good news is that we know, though, that the key to unlocking action on these bills is getting the small business money out there. Once we've got people on the program, we know that it's going to be powerful enough to move things along. So I think it's going to be, we don't like this delay. There is going to be a delay here, but everybody agrees that there's an absolute need here that needs to be filled. Now, we could say, I agree with what Brendan just said. We talk about $600 billion. You could easily double it and use up all of that. And so what that means, there's a lot of demand for these funds. And so
we're not talking about bailing out Boeing. We're talking about keeping a hair salon open.
Yeah, so they're gonna. So I think there's gonna be support for that, right? And so they can do some of the funding right now. Businesses are gonna need. They do need it. They need it today. They're gonna need more when we get to 4. If this is phase 3.5, they're gonna need it in phase 4 also. So when they go to negotiate the next the bigger package, or the next package, whether it's bigger or not, depending on what gets in this one, they're going to need small business funding in that package as well, and that's going to be incentive to get that bill done also. So that's why I'm optimistic that the bills will get done, because these small businesses absolutely need the funding, and there's bipartisan agreement on that. There isn't bipartisan agreement on the other pieces. It's not that people don't think hospitals need funding or the state and locals need funding, but to your point, the question is, do they need that today?
Exactly. Given
that, in the hospital front, for example, the administration is sitting on $70 billion that they have not distributed yet. Now, if you're Democrats right now, you may be thinking maybe they don't need all that much more money, and so it's an opportunity to plus up these accounts to get that, make a lot of that money available, so that there's more than enough for some of these programs. I don't think that's going to be the case, right? I think there's enough need and damage going on that all of this money is eventually going to be needed.
Yeah, and I think both sides can get what they want, but let's argue about that in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Right now, we just need unanimous consent and get $250 billion to the Treasury, because that money is going to be out the door in a week.
Yeah. So look, they'll be back. We know that they're talking. I think Monday or Tuesday they're going to get a deal. Complete a deal on this and be able to move something. Monday's the day when the Senate can begin some action on this. So we'll be hopeful of that, and we know that small businesses and economists and others are banging the drum on this to get this going and don't not cause any delay or any further delay. And so I'm optimistic on that. The other bit of good news, I'm going to call it good news. I mean, we're critical of the administration when with some of the things they've done or failed to do, and doesn't take away from having been slow on the start on both the health and economic response here. But I think the announcement yesterday of Get Back to Work was actually a positive and boosted the way people are thinking about the future. And I think it was a good thing. There's a lot of trepidation about Trump ordering states to do anything that he can't really order them to do, and ordering businesses to do things that they aren't ethically or legally ready to do. But we did talk about the likelihood that a plan with guidelines that was driven by the health experts
Exactly.
would probably be a good, good signal for people. And I think we saw that. I think it was, talk about it in phases. All of the responsibility still remains with states and businesses and schools and churches and other institutions to make their own decisions. But it said, here's the way you ought to think about it. And whatever it was, perfect or imperfect as it is, talking about reopening in a responsible way, not picking a date in the, not saying Easter we're going to open or May 1st we're going to open, but here are the conditions for opening. And then you can start imagining, what you can do to be able to be in a position to open and kind of get back to work. And I think it's still hugely risky. We know that the drug is still contagious. There are still opportunities for it to spike up in places. And I don't even mean politically risky, though it is that, and economically risky, though it is that, if we have to shut down. Just from, obviously from a health standpoint, it's risky if people go racing headlong too much into interacting and not following the rules on social distancing and using personal protective gear. So we'll see. But I think that's lifted spirits a little bit at the end of this week and heading into the weekend.
Yeah, I think that's right. And obviously markets are really getting excited about the treatment. Although it's anecdotal, clearly the equity market at least is very much seizing upon any positive news here. And I think you're right. The confluence of massive monetary and fiscal stimulus, despite a few delays here, that'll probably get worked out. And then just talking about having a sensible looking process for opening the country gets people thinking about it. It's the focus is firmly on recovery here. The reality is just how gradual does it have to be, and how long is that tail? And to do it responsibly in a way where you don't have those secondary flare-ups is obviously, based on the experience overseas, it's pretty challenging. And we've talked about the need for data and so on and so forth. But I think, I think that sort of goes back to the kind of fiscal response, the immediate get the money out the door to bridge the gaps for small businesses and industries that need it and households that need it is absolutely job one. But as things calm down a little bit here and the cadence of policy making slows to some extent, we've got a little bit of breathing room to think about that longer tail and to think about what policies might need to be in place if we have a situation where by early summer, midsummer, the end of the summer, we're still dealing with, uneven, fitful, we're in a recovery phase, but it's just not, it's not powerful, it's not consistent, it's uneven. And what kinds of policies in those circumstances might be needed? I'm going to sound like a total naive fool here talking about infrastructure, because infrastructure is it's a punchline, it's a laugh line. Infrastructure week, anybody in DC has had that. But we're in, we wrote a piece the other week basically saying this is a time for now or never. We've seen partisan bickering turn down to an almost unimaginable low over the last few weeks as the parties came together to come to think about this. And if you have a lingering, we see mass unemployment, and if we see lingering pockets of that around the country, it would be great to think. We all know that infrastructure is very bad as a rapid response because there's nothing that's ever shovel ready. But if you have seeding of infrastructure, if you begin to try to put funding in to make the plans and get the permits and try to have something that actually would be shovel ready like 6 months down the road. And that's the kind of forethought that may not be compatible with the current political and policy environment and the urgency of a lot of the spending. But they keep talking. The White House keeps talking about it. They do keep talking about it on Capitol Hill. And I think it's right. And to spend some resources to think about having a longer term economic support plan that really has some legs down the road if we do have a long tail of this thing.
Yeah, we're certainly going to need it 6 months from now and a year and 18 months from now. I don't think there's any question about that stimulus is going to be needed. We may come back and we talked on Wednesday on the special bonus Macrocast about, that maybe the markets are a little bit more, exuberant about, what the, the medium term economic outlook really looks like, or ought to look like relative to the whole. I mean, you have the data on so far the shovels that we've been using, the shovel ready. The shovel's been used on digging a really, really giant hole for the economy. We've got data now that is describing that hole for us, and it is an ugly picture that all the data paints that we're seeing. So so we say, like, well, what is the world going to look like a month from now or 2 months from now? It's something we can talk about, but talk about the hole that we're in right now. We got China numbers overnight that are their first negative quarterly reading ever, or at least since they started recording data, maybe since the Cultural Revolution, maybe since then.
I think you're right. Yeah,
probably right. And so minus what, 6.8%, John?
6.8.
Imagine the statistical official in Beijing that had that number and brought it up to his boss and said, "How about this?"
Yeah.
And the Chinese statistical, I mean, I
kind of like the symmetry of it, the sort of yin and yang. Up 6% or down 6%, right?
Right.
Right.
So who knows whether 6.8% is real or not? Who knows? It might have been deeper than that. But that, that's obviously was bad. Retail sales awful. Industrial production awful. Housing looks weak. It's unemployment. We got jobs. Yesterday another 5.5 million people filed for unemployment.
Yeah, and actually
2 million people on unemployment.
I actually took the unemployment claims as a good sign because, like we said before, I think the 6.5 didn't show that's how many people were filing. That's how many the system could handle. So I think the fact that this week was below that is indicative that we're getting everybody on the system that needs to be on the system.
Yeah, I was surprised. I was actually surprised because I was actually expecting the number to come in above consensus expectations. Consensus was, I don't know, the 5.2, 5.4 range, and I thought I would not have been at all surprised to see another 6 handle on unemployment. But still, add up the last few weeks, and it's 22 million people, which in total is more than what we saw during the Great Recession. So it's a very, very big number. Fortunately, all those people are getting unemployment benefits. They're about to start getting enhanced unemployment benefits, extra $600 a week. The checks of $1,200 per adult, $500 per child have begun to go out. They begin to be direct deposited. We're going to have some little delay here to get Trump's name on the paper checks that will go out for the other taxpayers. PPP money exhausted, more to come there. State and local money. Hospitals got $30 billion. So there's a lot of support out there. But like I said, it's a very, very it's a very deep hole. And even with what we learned in terms of some optimism on things like therapeutics, hopefully. We don't have new news on testing. We'd love to get everyone is clamoring for testing. We would like to see a lot more testing. Firms have questions ahead of them, and maybe when we come back, we can talk a little bit about what we're seeing from earnings and how the decisions that businesses have to make going forward, and what the world looks like for them. So why don't we drop in a break here? And come back and get into earnings and firms and see what they're thinking. You're listening to the HPS Macrocast.
Hamilton Place Strategies is an analytical public affairs firm based in Washington, D.C. Learn more at hamiltonplacestrategies.com or follow us on Twitter at HPS Insight.
All right, we're back on the Macrocast, guys. We're so in the middle of earnings week, earnings period. We got a lot of, we saw a lot of banks. What else out there? What are earnings telling us, and what are you seeing out there?
So I thought this was a very interesting one because you had all the big banks, the JP Morgans and the Bank of Americas, those, and Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. Those banks make up the bulk of our banking sector. They're behemoths, but they're not just banks. They're also investment banks. So, they do all this, the trading and the debt issuance. So this quarter saw huge volatility. So the investment banks made a lot of money off of trading, and that helped counteract any losses that they took on their lending books. So, the big banks all took $5-6 billion worth of reserves and saying, we know we're going to have some defaults on this, but we have plenty of money. None of these reserve builds it dug into their capital that they're required to hold. So, the big banks are, basically required to hold, 10 to 11%, 11.5% actually of, core tier one capital, which is, really treasuries and super safe assets. And it wasn't a big deal for the JP Morgans and the Bank of America. They had the money sitting there for it. But we then contrast that to the regional banks who have just started to report, where they don't have that investment banking income to offset their loan books. So while the investor calls, after the report for Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan, it was kind of like forward looking and, how you're going to do on this, that. When it came to like Key Bank, the whole call was based on credit and how much are you going to have to reserve, and then are you going to be able to pass the Fed stress test in the future? It looks like they will be able to, but the regional banks are going to have a lot harder time through this. We're not going to have a crisis like we did, but they might have to really start to cut back on it. But the interesting thing, so while the banks shares, regional banks went down a bunch, the market took the bank earnings well, because it did show that while we're going to have a pandemic and a fiscal crisis, an economic crisis, we're not going to go back through the financial banking crisis that we did in 2008. And then on top of that, you have real companies like Costco and Procter & Gamble, who did it well, and they raised their dividends. So while the banks have cut their dividends just to be safe, you have, other companies that are, great balance sheets and have extra money, so they're raising their dividends. And it's becoming, the yield on the S&P now is like 2.6%, and the 10-year Treasury is 70 basis points. So, you have a lot of investors now that almost have to use the equity market as a fixed income market to get some yield.
Yeah, and Brendan points to that winners and losers dynamic that we're seeing very starkly here. So there was some mirth on Twitter, in the financial Twitter sphere, about Procter & Gamble being characterized as toilet paper giant Procter & Gamble.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have necessarily been the highlight of their earnings call, but
we also saw Las Vegas Sands, who, that was a pretty quick call. We didn't do anything all quarter.
Yeah, and we see, obviously, Netflix is reporting next week. We're seeing a bunch of different companies come in next week. It's going to be
Amazon and Netflix. They're at all-time highs.
Right, and why wouldn't they be? You're just seeing them absolutely dominating the landscape. Screen time. Anybody with children at home, I can tell you, our screen time restrictions are loosened substantially. So. Netflix. Yeah,
and you have to think. You have to think that what's changing there. It's not just a temporary phenomenon. That it is, creating habits in people that might be longer lasting. So you get in the habit of using Amazon. Once you become Prime, people who sign up for Amazon Prime, they tend to keep it. They like the delivery and the advantages of Prime. So you could see it. Maybe the amount of sales will come down once people start coming back into the stores. But I don't think things like food delivery, Netflix streaming, Amazon usage is going to go back to pre-crisis, drop down below pre-crisis.
Totally agree.
I actually think there's a structural shift up not to the peak of crisis usage, obviously, but a structural shift above what we saw pre-crisis. And that bodes well for those stocks and their earnings long term. It's not just like, hey, they're making money now, let's go do, which might be the case with, Procter and Gamble, right? Right. Just, residential purchases of these things are of a lot of the things that they're selling, whether it's Purell or toilet paper or other, cleaning supplies, those kinds of things, they're going to come off. You can only consume so much. You assume that people were consuming what they were consuming, given the amount of hours that they were spending at home pre-crisis. And so we can imagine going back to that, and institutional purchases of these kinds of things, which have different margins and markups for when your apartment building or your office building buys these things. It's a different thing. So, but I do think on the delivery of a lot of these services, Grubhub, for example, like we're looking at restaurant changes for a long time. I think like food delivery, product delivery, entertainment delivery, I think is going to see a structural shift up.
And what about remote work? I mean, we've talked a little bit about this amongst ourselves offline, but for a small organization like Markets Policy Partners, for Brendan and I, working remotely isn't all that big a challenge, and the type of work that we do. But a larger organization like Hamilton Place Strategies, what's your experience been as a manager of a larger organization that has now been basically telecommuting for a month plus?
Yeah, it's not gonna change us in the sense that we're not going to go switching to full remote work. We have. But we do want our people to be skilled at remote work, and we have a couple. We have offices in San Francisco, New York. We keep those offices. I'm based in New York. We keep those offices fully integrated with the mothership down in DC. We don't do phone calls. We've always done video calls as a rule, because you're just more present in a video call than you are in a conference call. You can be on a conference call and you have it on mute, while you're shopping on Amazon, and so you can't do that when you're on video. Video, you have to be. People can see you, and you have to be more present. So those are good habits and skills that we've long tried to keep. But for the way we work, our collaborative way in the office, you guys are there, and you see it. We have our other partners with Kupanda Capital, who are in our space as well. They share our floor with us, and really amazing people. And we benefit from seeing each other, talking to each other. In fact, what I always say, the idea for this Macrocast was, when we'd walk through the hallway and you and John and Brendan and I would have a conversation about the economic news of the day. And when we were talking about about doing a podcast, I said, like those conversations are the best conversations I have about the economy and political economy. Let's make that the Macrocast. That's it, right? Let's just go do that. So but those kinds of conversations are the things that happen every day. Lots of offices, lots of people benefit from that. That said, there are on the margins, people are going to, I think, be able to demonstrate that you can do effective work remotely and take greater opportunity of that. And it's one thing to do that, just as a matter of lifestyle. For your lifestyle, it might make more sense to be able to work from home, and there won't be any stigma of you working from home on your camera because you have some need to be home. It's like it's okay, and we know that you can still work effectively. Also on things like work from home if you think you're under the weather. We actually at HPS we had to add sick days for people, just to emphasize how much we encourage them to stay home if you're sick. Don't fear like you're going to use up your sick days. So we added sick days for everybody who works at HBS, just so like we really, really mean it. Don't worry about running out of sick days. If you get sick, you feel like you're under the weather, stay home and keep everyone else, keep the hive safe. And I think so just greater flexibility for everybody, I think, is will be a real positive.
Yeah, I remember in my old job as an analyst, I would fly to Chicago for a 2-hour meeting with the bank management and then fly home. That's kind of stupid. We can just do that on a Zoom call now. So I do have to say, talking
Look
about
at the points.
Yeah.
There's no point. But Zoom doesn't give you
No,
points.
exactly. Yeah. But you are throwing me off today because Tony has a webinar with JP Morgan today. So he's combed his hair and he's in a nice shirt, and we're still in our quarantine gear.
Yeah, I'll be back in in my maybe a Penguins jersey. Hey, why don't we take a break and come back and talk about, let's do a quick look at some of the data for the week and anything to look forward to next week. You're listening to the HPS Macrocast.
You've heard of the HPS Macrocast, but have you listened to HPS Insights yet? Check out the HPS Insights podcast, including episodes about remote TV appearances, privacy and the role of big tech, the State of the Union, impeachment, and more on your favorite streaming platform or at hamiltonplacestrategies.com/podcast.
All right, we're back on the Macrocast. Guys, data and earnings, what's the news?
Yeah, next week will be kind of interesting because we get a lot of the regional banks. So that kind of shows you, how individual, communities are doing. But we also get a lot of the credit card and payments companies, the PayPals and the Discover Financials of the world. So that'll give us a decent look into, how people spending held up in the first quarter. But then we also just get, less financials this time. Like we get a Halliburton, we get Coca-Cola. Netflix, like John said, is coming. So we'll get also a little more of a cross current of not just the financial world, but the tech world and also the asset managers. But the asset managers are kind of easy. If the market goes up, they do well. If it goes down, they don't do quite so well.
Yeah, there's also going to be a lot of focus on any plans from states about reopening. Now that the White House has come out with their guidelines, which basically delegate to state governors,
yeah.
There's going to be a lot of attention next week. Maybe too early for any actual activities, any reopening activities, but there's certainly going to be states that may be coming out with more detailed guidelines.
And it looks like everybody,
a lot of focus on that.
Yeah, all the states are forming regional coalitions to on the reopening. Yeah.
They kind of resemble the college sports conferences a little bit.
I
right?
know.
We don't have there's not an SEC or a Big 12 pack yet, but it looks like we have a Big 10, Big East, and Pac 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in markets, we've achieved a lot of stability in various asset classes. Certainly, the structural and plumbing that's cooled down to a great extent, and the focus really is on the equity markets. And we're getting a lot of questions from clients about the fundamental underpinnings of this rally, whether this is really supportable, sustainable, and so that's going to be the spotlight in the markets is really going to be on equities next week.
Okay. And hopefully we'll have news about about some of the government programs too. We talked about PPP and funding PPP. We also have a public comment period closed on the Fed's Main Street lending program.
Yes, that's a really important point. Yeah,
it's another big one that's going to impact companies up to 10,000 employees. So we'll keep an eye on that. More to come on the effectiveness of these programs, funding of them, but hopefully, and ending this week on an upswing. Maybe not. We can't be totally positive about everything. I think we're still looking at, a few months of really challenging economic conditions, but can't help feeling that maybe we're, we can see the end of the tunnel. Anyway, we'll take that positive feeling into the weekend.
Yep. The PGA announced they're going to play without fans starting in June. So, things are coming.
Yeah, and we're big fans of the PGA themselves, the organization, and help them, and have been trying to help their a lot of their professionals and workers to make sure that they take advantage of the programs that are available for them. They're all really good people. So so that's exciting and good news. And hopefully at some point soon we can even get the courses open.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. We'll catch you next week on the HPS Macrocast.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share. Find more from Hamilton Place Strategies at hamiltonplacestrategies.com and follow Tony Fratto on Twitter at Tony Fratto. Learn more about John Fagan, Brendan Walsh, and the work they do at Markets Policy Partners by visiting marketspolicy.com.